Hi, as our admin just said, my name is Younglin, and I am a rising 11th grader in New School of Doha, and part of the composting branch in our school's environmental community effect club. For the last 2 years, the composting branch has focused on not only reducing food waste in the school, but also making a special composting station where all our food waste is collected and used. Our presentation will be focusing on the problems and solutions regarding food waste and food choices. We split our presentation into 3 parts: food choices, food waste, and composting. I'll be in charge of composting, and I will also talk about SG12, responsible consumption and production. During our presentation, if you have any questions, please write down below in the chat, and we will try to answer them at the end. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Tara and I hope you're doing well during this time, and I'm excited to share my experiences with you. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I was born in Vancouver, Canada, and now I live in Doha, Qatar, and go to the American School of Doha with both Younglin and Hannah. I'm the food choices and composting branch leader, and I truly started becoming passionate about both these topics at the beginning of high school. But I'll mainly be talking about food choices because it's such an important factor for the environment. Now that we have more time at home, it's important that we choose more carefully about what we buy at the supermarket. And it's time to make a grocery list and even try more vegan and vegetarian options as well. I do want to put it out there though that I personally am not vegetarian, but my goal is to encourage you throughout the session is to encourage you all to be decreasing the amount of meat, animals, and animal products that you eat, and be increasing the amount of vegetables, fruits, and nuts and carbs that you eat instead. We will also be asking several questions throughout the session. So when we do, please put your answer in the chat box. It doesn't matter if it's wrong, it's just a guess. And also, please make sure to put your mics muted so then you don't interrupt any of the presenters. I hope you all enjoy.
Hi everyone, it's nice to meet you all. I'm Hannah. I'm also a rising 11th grader at the American School of Doha. I've been in Doha for 4 years now, and during my time here, I've become extremely passionate about both MUN and the environment through my involvement in my school's MUN club and the Effect Club. I'm British, and I'm moving back to England this summer, where I hope to be active in similar clubs in my new school. I'll be talking about food waste and food disparities all around the world, and I'll give you all some case studies as well. I'll also talk about SDGs, climate action, and sustainable cities and communities. I hope throughout this presentation you'll learn a lot about both the topics of food consumption and production, because I think you all know we've been doing a lot of the eating part of the cycle, especially in quarantine. And I'll talk to you about what you can do at both your home and at school. I'm super excited to be one of your hosts today, and I hope you find this workshop to be fun and informative.
Okay, so as I said, I'll be talking about food choices. So let's talk about the impact that eating animals and animal products overall has on the environment. So looking at this cow has to get its protein and nutrients from somewhere, right? Well, yeah, it gets it from vegetation. So it just makes sense to get your protein and nutrients from the vegetation, which is basically just vegetables first. Because eating the cow is basically just the process, right? Because the vegetables the cow eats the vegetables and then we eat the cow. And this goes the same for all other animals as well. So just to put it into perspective, this cow eats 16 pounds of vegetation, and eating 16 pounds of vegetation, this cow turns that into 1 pound of flesh. Imagine what humans could do with 16 pounds of vegetation. So thinking of the water aspect, think if we had 6,800 liters of this water bottle. If we had 6,800 of these water bottles, we could get half a kilogram of beef. Now, I would like you all to guess in the chat box how many kilograms of wheat or loaves of bread you could get from 6,800 of these water bottles, or 6,800 liters. The answer is 35 kilograms of wheat, or 60 loaves of bread. And as you can see before, with 6,800 liters of water, you can make 1.5 kilograms of chicken or 34 eggs. So half a kilogram of beef is just the patty in your hamburger, while you can feed so much more people with 60 loaves of bread. And with 6,800 liters of water, you can make 1,600 almonds. And the thing with almonds is that it also has a lot of protein as well. And with 20, and if those of you concerned with the amount of protein, you can get 6 grams of protein with 23 almonds. So that's quite a lot. So let's look at the steak. To have a balanced plate, we should probably cut the steak in half and add more rice and vegetables. So then your plate is nutritious and actually good for you. While meat does have its advantages, vegetables does as well. And the goal is to have a variety on your plate, not just some potatoes next to the steak. Well, many of you are thinking right now probably, well, it's a food chain, right? It's a way of life. Well, you're right. But the thing is that humans and animals are different. And while there's a lot of research that points towards humans being made to be omnivores, uh, the thing is that humans are over consuming. And part of the reason is that we're not eating the whole part of the animal. Because we're not eating the whole part of the animal, many heads of animals are thrown to waste. But in many cultures, they do eat the heads of the animals. It's both nutritious and delicious. And I've eaten it as well, and it's pretty delicious. Now, many of you are probably thinking, well, that's kind of disgusting. Well, while it might not seem so appetizing, it's actually quite nutritious and delicious, and it doesn't go to waste either. And so, just to put it in perspective, this is how animals kill animals. Well, this is how humans kill animals. So we really can't compare ourselves to animals in the first place. And this shows how many and humans kill multiple animals at the same time. Now, I would also like you all to guess how many, in percentages, about how much percentage of the earth is lactose intolerant. I'll give you a second to put that in the chat box. I know I probably gave you a sneak peek of that. I apologize. The answer is 65% of the human population has reduced their ability to digest lactose after infancy. In other words, they've lost an enzyme called lactase. And so that's the vegan side of things as well. But the other important thing is that antibiotics are given to animals so then they can produce more milk for us or even eggs. And so that just shows that we are in fact over consuming. So part of it is also just simply changing your mindset, and changing that mindset is super duper important. So for example, eating a plate of meat is delicious, right? But where did that plate of meat come from in the first place? Well, instead of calling it beef, maybe calling it a cow is better. Because knowing how food gets on our plate is extremely important. And that goes for vegetables as well. Buying locally, for example, is much more environmentally sustainable. It's better for your health as well because a lot of locally grown fruits and vegetables don't have a lot of chemicals. And often buying locally is much cheaper. So this is a table showing the vitamins and minerals that you need, and these are almost all vegan except vitamin B12 because you can't get vitamin B12 from a plant-based diet. So please feel free to take a screenshot of this, and this is just a visual to show that you can in fact get all the nutrients except vitamin B12 and minerals that you need from a plant-based diet. So maybe adding some of these to your grocery list would be the best idea.
Okay, so just a little side story. As Tara was talking about animal products being used in lots of places, I just wanted to point out that it's not just food. So in England, this was a while ago, but there were protests about how the £5 note used tallow, which is a type of animal fat, to make the note more bendy. And as far as I'm aware, the government hasn't changed this, which is quite interesting. And I also wanted to talk briefly about sugar, because there's so much of it in everything we eat. The main problem with this is for our health. Sugar causes things like heart disease, cancer, obesity, and diabetes. In the short term, sugar gives us energy that unfortunately is often followed by us crashing and losing focus, and sugar can be really addictive. A piece of advice I would give is to try and buy foods that you know what's in it, so you can control how much sugar and other nutrients you eat. The more products that we buy that have preservatives and added sugar, the more the food industries will see this and create more sugary products, but vice versa, less sugary products means that the food industries will follow the demand in a more positive direction. The picture on the screen is a board showing how much sugar is in some different types of drinks. We used to have one of these in the lobby at school, and I think it's really helpful seeing the actual quantities of sugar in products, because we buy food and we read the nutrition labels, but sometimes it says things like 15 grams of sugar, and we don't always know what this looks like. And another example is gelatin. It's in things like gummies and marshmallows and desserts like ice cream, and it's made of animal products.
Okay, so these are just some suggested questions that you should ask yourself before you buy anything, whether it's candy or even animal products or beef. So these are just some questions that you should ask yourself because they're really important. I'll go through some of them. So number one is how much sugar does it have? This is really important, as Hannah was talking about, because it's quite bad for your health and it can often be addictive. Some products that we don't even think have think have sugar do in fact have sugar, and it's really important to look at that chart that Hannah was talking about as well. And number two, how was it manufactured? Again, this just makes us a better person because knowing how food gets on our plate is often terrifying because you never thought of that before. Number four, the environmental advantages and disadvantages. This goes from buying products with plastic or products that have animal products or animals. And a lot of gummies, like Hannah was talking about, do have animal products, and we've never even thought of that before. Number eight, am I going to finish this product? This really has to do with food waste. But if you think about it, why should you buy food that you're not going to eat? It wastes money and is overall quite bad for the environment. Number nine, could I find the same ingredient as at a farmer's market? So often this can be a more, at farmer's market, especially in Doha, there's some torba markets. And at torba markets, it's more expensive. But if you go to other supermarkets, it actually can be it can be less expensive. So at our school, we have this initiative called Green Mondays, and it's basically becoming vegetarian for one day. Or you can even try more vegan and vegetarian options as well. This is a more COVID-19 friendly version of the poster, and it just showing things that what you can do at home to save the environment, basically. And this is something that I made for Earth Day, which is your Earth Day challenge to go vegan for a single day. Now Hannah's going to be talking about food waste.
Sorry, is my camera on?
No.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so food waste is when food that could have been used goes into the landfill or is disposed of incorrectly. So food waste is a big issue, and one of the reasons is because we, as consumers, don't know the full extent of it. Food waste happens at all stages in the food industry, from farmers choosing which products to sell, to packaging, to us throwing away our unfinished meals. An example is baby carrots. So you know those carrots that are all cut to the same size and all look the same? Those carrots are in fact peeled and shaped from regular carrots, meaning there's lots of carrot left over that doesn't go into the market. This is a problem because the carrot skin is often the healthiest part, filled with the most antioxidants, and they are often packaged with plastic. As you can tell, there's lots of waste that we as consumers are not generally aware of. So finishing your food or only taking as much as you need is super important. And something to think about. You know, when you get sandwiches to take away, have you ever seen the end slice of bread? So shops don't sell it because they don't think that consumers will like it as much, but how much of this is actually our fault? And food waste is not very economic. As you can see, in New York, every year, 1.2 million tons of food goes into the landfill, costing around $80 per ton. And this isn't just one person's fault. And 1/3 of the world's food is thrown away annually, which is worth around $1 trillion. Imagine what we could do with $1 trillion. Obviously, it would be very difficult to implement a nationwide or global zero waste policy, Because going from what we have today to full-scale sustainable waste practices would cause major problems in the food industry. Lots of people would lose their jobs. There might be customers who are used to the time-saving option of pre-cut and pre-packaged foods. And whilst many of us are familiar with full supermarkets and plenty of options, many people are hungry and starving. How does it make sense that we have people that are malnourished? 815 million people, and yet we waste 1/3 of our food. Zero hunger is one of the UN SDGs, and I'll just talk about it briefly. But so many people don't have the choice to get all the nutrients that Tara was talking about earlier. They just eat what they can. This causes all sorts of health problems like growth problems and fatigue and more, all of which makes it difficult for to concentrate on economic advancement and education. And after all that, sadly, there's many people that die of starvation. So we have food waste and huge use of resources on one side, and then on the other side of the spectrum, we have starvation and hunger. And so if we look specifically at the US, 40% of the food is wasted, or 63 million tons. Before I said 1 ton equates to around $80, which of course varies depending on the region, but that's still an enormous amount of money. The FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, estimated that 20% of the fruits and vegetables in North America are lost at the farm level from in the field and in packaging, which means that before the food even gets to the consumers, before we even see it, 20% of it is lost. And the US produced 218 billion pounds of milk in 2019. And I'd like you to guess how much of that goes to the supermarkets, which is the place where you probably get the majority of your milk. So you can type your answers in percentages in the chat box if you want, or you can just think about it. So surprisingly, only half of this goes into the supermarkets. The rest goes to schools and businesses and restaurants. This gives us a problem because the industry packages food differently for different consumers. For example, restaurants are not going to want lots of little tiny milk cartons aimed for children. They want large quantities of milk so it's easy to use. This means that during COVID-19 especially, when restaurants and businesses and schools closed, this milk has nowhere to go. Some of it is donated, but as the supply is so much larger than the demand, the milk industries actually end up pouring a lot of their milk down the drain. So with COVID-19, farmers are resorting to throwing away a lot of their production as they overestimated the produce they would need before the lockdown. In Europe, when supermarkets have an excess of produce or food nearing its expiration date, they often give it to food banks. So using the same tactic, we could potentially reroute unused produce to soup kitchens or other donors. And to keep food prices stable, some producers will destroy their stock, like with the milk example, so that the prices remain constant and there isn't too much of a drop in price. And of course, there are people that are overbuying or buying excessive amounts of food that they don't need, which often means that there's not enough food for everyone else. So people like the elderly and essential workers don't have any. And this all means that there'll be more food waste as well. Stockpiling on things like fresh fruits and fresh bread causes problems because they don't last long if you don't store it correctly. So to start off with, land is needed for crops, and to create space for these crops, deforestation is often present. This will get worse as a growing population requires more food. There's also a lot of water being used to raise these crops, which is especially annoying when we consider the fact that this precious and sought after resource is being used on food that's eventually wasted. There's also the environmental impact of transportation. Planes and boats create CO2 by importing food from place to place, not only to different countries, but also the different packaging and sorting factories.
So I'll also be talking about the different advantages of different types of oil. So for example, olive oil causes soil erosion, but it overall gives back to the environment, and it's actually quite good for your health. Canola oil, on the other hand, is bad for your health, but it's actually quite good for the environment. And palm oil, as of course, as we all know, is actually quite bad for both the environment and for your health because it's one of the drivers of deforestation. Coconut oil is also is okay for your health and pretty and the best one of the best for the environment as well. So our point is to choose different types of oil and use the minimal amounts of it. So then it's because it's, first of all, it's better for your health and it's better for the environment. So win-win.
So Tara has been talking about why these different types of oils are really bad for your health, and I'll be diving deeper into the fact, as there is sometimes a statement that different plant-based oils will always be better for you. So fats are an essential macronutrient need for the body, as it supports cell growth and protects your organs and keeps your body warm. Generally, there are 4 different types of fats, but I'll be focusing on the trans fats, as is considered by the FDA and the American Heart Association as the cause of heart disease. Natural trans fats are found in small quantities in animal products. However, these are minimal and very difficult to eat more than the recommended amount. However, high quantities of it are found in vegetarian and vegan alternatives, such as vegetable oil, margarine, and non-dairy coffee creamer. Most of the time, these are happening because of the refinement process that turns these normal plant-based products into oils. Although there are studies that do show that vegans eat less trans fat than the average person, it is important to know that concentrated amounts are present in a lot of vegan and vegetarian alternatives.
Okay, I'd like you to take a look at this statistic. So that's 70 billion animals every year. To me, I just found this so shocking, especially considering there's only 9 billion humans on Earth. There is also, this is not equally distributed. It's often the wealthier nations that consume a lot of this meat, which in some places, meat is considered a luxury. And yes, animal agriculture is the second largest contributor to human-made greenhouse gases.
So right now we've been talking a lot about food waste, but not a lot about the solutions that we can implement. So one of the best effective strategies is just take the amount of food that you're going to eat. This kind of strategy is found in buffets and is great as you can portion your food. However, again, buffets are notorious for food waste. Your best bet actually is just cook your own food at home. Although, as Hannah said, food manufacturing factories are also responsible for food waste. For example, ketchup. While picking out tomatoes, they are put into a batch of tens of thousands of tomatoes. However, if that one batch has one defective tomato, that entire batch of 10,000 is completely thrown away, where it's never to be seen again. Our point is to please think before you take that extra piece of side dish or drink or extra spoonful of rice. All those scraps that you scrape off your plate has to go somewhere, and we all unfortunately know where it's going.
So the good news is there's lots that you can do. So you can plan your meals in advance to avoid overbuying, and you can go shopping with your parents to look for more environmentally sustainable options. You can also look to see where the food is coming from. So it's best to buy local foods as, like Tara said, A, you know where it comes from, and then B, the food has to cover less ground, which means less CO2 is emitted from transportation. You can also avoid unnecessary packaging. Maybe instead of buying cut fruits and vegetables, buy whole foods. This is beneficial as pre-cut foods tend to be more expensive. For example, in our school cafeteria, they sell pre-cut fruits in small plastic tubs, and Tara and I used to buy lots of tubs of mango quite often, which would cost around $3. Comparing that to buying a whole mango for around 30% less money. So the reason people buy this is because for convenience, but actually you can get a whole lot more mango for your money if you just cut it yourself. And another tip, you can just freeze your fruits and vegetables so they last longer. So it limits your food waste at home since you can just use the food whenever you want, and there isn't the time pressure of when the food expires. And you can also learn more about this topic by watching documentaries like The Theatre of Life, but coming to this workshop is also a great way to open your mind. And I'd like to challenge you to talk to the chefs at your school or even at restaurants and ask them about where the food comes from and what they do with their leftovers. And lastly, you can also create or be part of clubs at your own school because it's great because you get to help out and make a change in your own community.
Oh, Joshua, from Ghana, I actually saw your question where it asked if there's a way to recycle food waste. And this is kind of another way of doing it, composting. It's another way of stopping food waste. And just to put in simple terms, composting is where food waste is turned to useful fertilizer, also known as compost. This is a great tool for reducing food waste and using the compost to fertilize our garden and make the environment much cleaner. So now we will see how we can start to compost. Generally, the two most popular types of composting are the manual compost and the mechanical compost. Shown here are the two types that our school has been using, the 3-bin system shown to the left and the redundant compost shown to the right. However, you do not necessarily need to build a bin or buy one, as a simple ditch, such as this one, works as well. A compost that's smaller than 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter will most likely rot the compost, as not enough oxygen will actually circulate through the system. So now we'll be going into the actual composting basics. So to start a compost, you must first survey the foods that may be used in the compost. These two types are generally browns and greens, and you can see that dairy, bones, and any meat products are not compostable, as they would generally rot before they will actually decompose into useful compost. So, and now I've talked about previously, there's a matter of greens and browns. Browns are any carb-rich items such as dried leaves, sawdust, eggshells, and other carbohydrate-rich foods. Greens, on the other hand, are plants and foods that still have high moisture composition and it's alive, such as leftover vegetables, fruits, and grass clippings. From then on, you will add in around a 2-to-1 ratio of browns to greens. Afterwards, you will add in water so that the pile is moist but not wet. From then on, you turn the pile. So after you've done all these steps, the waiting game ensues. You will just have to turn the compost once every day, and you just repeat the steps from 3 to 5 until your finished compost is created. Now I'll be diving into which compost system is actually the most effective. Even though the 3-bin system and the redundant do look different, all compost uses these same 6 steps to make compost. They just look different as the steps for turning the compost is different. In composting, the compost goes through 3 different stages: the fresh compost from the left to decomposition, and then to the finished compost, which will be moved from each bin as seen here in the 3-bin system. For a redundant, however, it's different, as it is done by a gear, and finished compost comes out from an exit located at the bottom. These two actually don't have that much of a difference. So it's not a matter of which one is more effective or not. It's more of which one you have time and money to do. The redundant is generally much easier to use. However, it will be much more expensive as you do have to buy it. So now you may be asking how effective this might actually is. Luckily, the Effect Club has already made a good graph for us. So we are showing the statistics that show amount of food weight that was thrown away or put into the compost, and the carbon emissions that we were able to avoid. The blue represents weight of food and weight, and the red represents the equivalent amount of carbon emissions. This highlights the amount of carbon emissions that is actually being produced from wasted food, about twice the metric kilo per food. Luckily, using the composting system, we were able to avoid this completely. So the reason why our school actually decided to have a compost was because we realized the amount of good food that our school is wasting. Hundreds of kilos of good vegetables, fruits, and coffee grounds contributing to pollution. So we decided to try and fix this problem by creating a composting system. And it has largely impacted our school and expanded to these amazing group of people today.
So I started my own composting system at home about 2 months ago, and this first came to my attention when there was a truck full of yard waste that was exiting my compound about every month. And so that was all going into the landfill, but I knew I could do something about it. Obviously, I can't compost all by myself a whole truck of compost, but at least I can compost what was mine. So I started this composting system 2 months ago. It's dry in this picture, but at the moment it's quite moist and it's working well for me. I've been turning it about every week, and the easiest way to turn what I think is to be layering it. So once you lay it, so every time that you put in food waste, make sure to cover it with with sawdust or any browns. So some of the tips that I would recommend for composting is not to paint your compost whatsoever, because all those chemicals can go inside your compost. And of course, as Younglin has been saying, and make sure to turn it. If you're unable to compost, Hannah has a solution.
Okay, so you might have been listening to what Tara is talking about building a compost from scratch, and you might think, oh, you might not have enough time to turn it, or maybe you don't have enough space, or maybe you're just looking for a more lazy option. So I have a solution for that. So I was thinking about building a compost here in Maine, but I'm in a shared family cabin, and even though I would have turned the compost every day, I thought it would have been too much to ask everyone in my family to do the same when they come up here. So what I did with my family was I bought a compost online, and you can find them on Amazon and lots of other websites. And so I put some examples on this presentation. So the one my family used was called the Miracle Grow, and this specific one has 2 barrels. So when one is full, you can still use it, which is great. And like Younglin explained, I put the browns in, like the dry leaves first, and then my food waste. And we have this little bucket in the kitchen, and when it's full, which is around once a day maybe, we just put it in the composter, and it's really easy, and it doesn't take up too much space, and it hasn't started smelling yet. We only got it this summer, so we'll see how it goes. So this composter costs around $100, but there's definitely other brands that are cheaper. So the cheapest one I found was actually free in some places, and to be fair, this is generally in wealthier nations, but they give composters for free as an incentive for individuals to take on composting. So be sure to look and see if you're eligible to get a free one wherever you are. So food, like recycling, should be like a cycle. So with composting, this is what happens. With food in landfills, actually, this cycle stops because landfills are like dumping grounds, and this is just going to keep getting bigger and bigger. And with these landfills producing CO2 and methane, there's harm to the environment. There's also a large disparity between more economically developed countries, or MEDCs, and less economically developed countries, or LEDCs, because wealthier countries often have the resources to come up with and implement solutions, but LEDCs do not. And a lot of LEDCs rely on food production and exportation as their main industry, and they're dependent on the importing countries, which is also a problem right now from COVID-19. Food waste means a loss of opportunity, though, for individuals. Fertilizer can be sold. So, for example, at our school, we sold a lot, and it was quite profitable. So I'd like you to guess how much a 50-liter bag of fertilizer sells for, and you can put your guesses in the chat box in dollars. Okay, so it's actually around $80 or $98 or around $100 for a big bag of fertilizer. But if you like gardening like me, you'll know that this doesn't actually last that long. So if you think about it, this means if you add compost, this means that you won't have to spend that much on fertilizer, as you'll have your own. And in theory, you could even sell it and make a profit.
So now you might be asking yourself, how does this all help the SDGs, or connect the SDGs? Well, for composting specifically, it's tied into SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, as composting is another way to give back to the community, stopping food waste and using finished compost as a garden fertilizer. Also, specifically speaking, we have the UN goal of 12.3, which also talks about reducing food waste.
Okay, so SDGs 11 and 13 are both extremely relevant when talking about the food industry and food waste. SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, talks about making sure cities are long-lasting and able to keep themselves going. If you think about it, human waste in landfills that is not reused or recycled just rots there, which is not a sustainable use of land or resources. And then SDG 13, climate action, which is a topic I'm really passionate about, relates to food waste as well. A misconception is that when food goes into landfills, it just composts and turns into fertilizer there with all the other rubbish. But this isn't actually what happens. It actually rots, which releases harmful chemicals into the air like methane, which is actually worse than CO2. It's one of the most harmful gases that accelerates the process of climate change. And now Tara will talk about another SDG.
So I'm going to be talking about SDG 15, which is basically just taking care of the life that we have on our planet. So the thing is that 2.6 billion people depend directly on agriculture, which is a big problem, because if we were to decrease the amount of meat consumption, people would rely less on it. And this is just basically taking care of the life that we have on our planet, because that's really important, and that relates directly to food choices.
So now, now that we're actually at the end of our presentation, we will now be answering some of the questions that you guys have been posting. And these are actually pretty good questions. So I'm actually excited to answer them. Yeah, so the first one I saw, which was good, is, but there's the issues of expiration dates, where Hannah was talking about sustainable transportation and how transferring, and are there any transferring options that are more sustainable. So as Tara mentioned before, there are different ways to go about this, such as going just to your local market. So if you ever go to your local farmers market, all the times it will be non-GMO, and all the transportation is done by hand. So it limits the risk of any sort of CO2, of using CO2. Let's see.
Somebody asked, how do you think that products should be provided without plastic at this time of pandemic, where physically touching these things can result harmful for consumers? Or is that the one? Does anybody want to do that?
Well, to answer that, during this quarantine is really unfortunate, because we are forced to use a lot of methods to try and make ourselves, make sure that we're healthy and don't get contaminated with COVID-19. However, there's always reusable options, such as, if you go to the grocery store, you can always, bring your own containers, or like if you go to, or like what our family does, we bring our own containers to our restaurants. Another thing we could do is that we don't necessarily know how long this pandemic is going to last for, but once this pandemic is over, we won't be using these over the top, COVID stopping methods. So right now it's a problem, but it's not like it's going to go on forever. So we'll just have to unfortunately deal with it for now.
And also, some places have these little kind of sort of mesh bags, and you can buy some of those and then put like vegetables and fresh fruits in there, so you don't need to buy like bagged carrots or like other vegetables like that. So that's something you can do, but I definitely agree it's not so great right now, because, for example, when I went to the supermarket, we brought our reusable bags, and then they said, sorry, we can't let you use these, we have to use the plastic bags. It made me really annoyed, because I wasn't sure what to do. So hopefully when COVID-19 is over, or less anyways, then we'll go back to using more reusable things, and people will be more aware of it as well.
And also, when you have plastic bags, you can also be reusing them in general. And so for example, my family uses the plastic bags that we have as trash bags instead of buying trash bags.
And I believe this will be our last question, because we're almost out of time. So last we will be talking about how can we redirect food surplus to countries with low food resources who face problems like starvation and malnourishment. That is a really good question, as most of the times when food surplus is really fresh, it's really hard to try and transport it to different countries. And even then, there's the unfortunate issue of money. We can't do everything for free, as money is a driving factor of how we basically do anything in the world. And so there are unfortunately different government organizations and NGOs that actually do this kind of thing, where if there's ever an excess surplus of food that is produced by a farm, they will take it and they will try and resupply it to either locally or ship it to a maybe a war-torn country or a country that is in need. Except for that, there isn't much we can do except try and support these NGOs and countries that do actually do this.
Okay, just one last question. This is a quite short one. It says, do you use red wriggly worms for composting? So this is actually a vermiculture. We did want to have one at school, but then we stopped. This is basically for more small scale compost. What Younglin was talking about is more large scale. So yeah, there are different types of compost, and some of them are more profitable, and some of them are less profitable.
Oh, and then there's one more question about chemicals and avoiding chemicals in food. So generally, organic food, even though it's more expensive sometimes, is good options. And like I said before, buying locally, because then generally you know more about where it comes from, and then you can, like, if you go to a farmer's market or something, you can ask people or ask the farmers what they use, how they grow it, and things like that. So if you know where it comes from, it's sometimes less likely to have all of these harmful chemicals.
And I believe that is all we have.
So we go to the Kahoot, or I don't know if
No, we
we
don't have enough time.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you everyone so much for listening to us for 40 minutes. It was a great pleasure and honor to present to all of this. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, and I hope you guys all have a great day, and please stay safe during this time of
yeah. And sorry we couldn't get to the Kahoot.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Hannah, Younglin, Tara, for presenting your wonderful presentation. It was really informative. I'd encourage all the participants to check out the other workshops as well, and make sure to keep in touch with your presenters. And maybe if you implement some of the suggestions, you can share it with them later on. Yeah, I guess that's it. We're nearing the end of the session. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. You guys can just go ahead and.
Oh, and then our emails were on the slideshow, but we can put ours here in the chat box.
I can share my screen again. Sorry. So these are our emails if you would like to contact us.